talk to you today about the latest innovations, the latest additions to the product. And we're going to have our head of product management for Traps, also a founder of Cyvera, up here on the stage to show you a pretty cool demo that really demonstrates the layers of protection that you get from Traps on the endpoint. My name is Sebastian Goodwin. I do product marketing for Traps, and I'm just going to start before the demo to tell you about how it works and sort of the evolution of the product up to this point. So a year ago at Ignite, we were talking about the acquisition of Cyvera, right? Cyvera had this incredible exploit prevention technology, and we talked about it a lot last year. Since then, we've made some pretty incredible enhancements, and I'll talk to you about those. But you know, the fact that this was brought on into Palo Alto networks a year ago, and since then we had 6 months later we had the version 3.1 released, and now today we're launching version 3.2. So it's come a tremendous way in 12 months' time, and you know, this doesn't always happen with technology acquisitions, right? Sometimes these products get absorbed into companies and they go there and they die. But this is a story of a product that's really come a tremendous way in a short amount of time, and we'll tell you what those enhancements are in detail. But the main things are that it's no longer just an exploit prevention product. It's a complete endpoint protection solution, including prevention of unknown malware, and we'll talk about how that works. It's integrated into the rest of our platform so that you're able to leverage the intelligence gained from our Wildfire threat intelligence cloud. And the scalability, the centralized management has really come a long way, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. So where did it start? A year ago, we had this amazing exploit prevention technology that is able to prevent zero-day exploits. So your systems just are not vulnerable to these advanced threats. And so that was the basis of the technology and where it started. So does it actually work? Yeah, the results that we've seen over the last years are pretty phenomenal. Every time we see new exploits coming out, new 0 days, we see that the existing capabilities in Traps, these same capabilities that have been there for years, are able to prevent these 0-day threats. And these are just an example of 3 of them, right? And the newest Adobe Flash 0 days that you've probably all heard about over the last few months, they were prevented by Traps. There's no need to update. There's no new signatures. Because we focus on the core exploit techniques that all these exploits use, we're able to prevent these attacks. And you know, on the slide here, 3 different CVEs, and showing the exploit techniques that are used. And in red, you've got the exploit prevention modules that we have in the product that block or prevent each of those techniques. I'll go deeper into how this works in a couple slides. So that's exploit prevention. But now, with version 3.2 of the product, we have a lot more than just exploit prevention. We have advanced execution control, which allows you to set very granular policies on the endpoint for what's allowed to run and under what conditions. You can set restrictions on child processes, USB memory sticks if you want to allow execution off of those, and you can prevent unsigned executables from running. You also have very granular control over the files themselves that are allowed to run by hash. So you can harden a system down and determine what's allowed to run and what's not if you want to have that kind of granular management, which is good for systems that are fairly static, like your POS systems or SCADA environments where you don't have a lot of new software that's being installed on a day-to-day basis. So that's execution control. Then we have our Wildfire integration. And now in version 3.2, the integration is a lot stronger. The endpoints can upload unknown executables for analysis in Wildfire. So you can set, if you want to really lock down an environment, you can set the policy so that you're not going to allow any new executable to run on the endpoint until it's been analyzed in Wildfire, and Wildfire returns the verdict and says this file's not malicious. So that's pretty powerful. And then finally, let's say that we do allow the file to execute and it tries to do something malicious. We have these malware prevention modules that are included in the product now that will prevent those techniques, like threat injection, for example. So it's a very comprehensive, multi-layered approach, doesn't rely on signatures, and is able to prevent unknown malware and exploits. So let's talk about how we do this, how the technology actually works. The basis, the premise of the technology is that there are core techniques that are used by all exploits. And we have prevention modules in the product that prevent these techniques. So we don't have to track these thousands of new exploits that come out every year, millions of new malware variants that come out. That's a game that nobody can win, to keep up with those things. The exploit techniques are very few in number. So a couple of dozen exploit techniques are used for all these new zero-day exploits that we see coming out. So if you can prevent the techniques, you can prevent the exploit, including tomorrow's exploits, the 0 days that we don't know about yet. The other nice thing about this approach is that exploits use a chain of techniques. They typically have to use 3 to 5 techniques in order to successfully run. If we can block just one of those techniques in the chain, we prevent the exploit completely. And similarly with malware, there are techniques like threat injection, for example, that if you can prevent that, you prevent the malware from running. So just to dive a little deeper, because this idea of exploit techniques can be a little bit difficult to understand at first. So imagine this diagram here is Adobe Acrobat Reader. The PDF document that's being opened has an exploit embedded in the file. Now, Adobe Reader, as we know, it has vulnerabilities. Some we know about, and others we don't, right? So some of these are known, they're just not patched, and others are vulnerabilities that are yet to be discovered. And so when the user opens up this PDF file, the exploit code embedded in that tries to run and use these techniques. So these are just examples. Heap spray is one kind of technique that it might use. And if it can successfully leverage these exploit techniques, it'll run the attacker's code. Okay? So that's how the exploitation works in a very simplified way. When you have traps running on the endpoint, these exploit prevention modules are injected seamlessly into the process, in this case the Adobe Reader process, and protects it from these exploit techniques. So as soon as that heap spray is attempted, it's blocked. It doesn't work. The techniques actually don't work against the application. And so blocking that technique prevents the attack from running. So the question might come to mind, well, what if they figure out a way to bypass our protection, or they invent some new exploit technique that we haven't seen before. Well, because of the chain-like nature of these exploit techniques, even if we do miss one, we block the next one in the chain. And so the exploit is still prevented. And so the attacker's code doesn't run. So that's the exploit prevention approach. And it's been, as I showed you with some of the examples earlier, extremely effective. This can apply to any application as well. So even internally developed applications that you have, proprietary applications, can be protected using this approach. So it'll protect those from exploit. So that's the exploit side, but okay, not every attack starts with an exploit. Sometimes it's just a malicious executable that the user is fooled into running, or they download from a website and they run it. So how do we prevent against these unknown executables? We have a multi-layered approach to that, as I mentioned earlier. The first layer is our advanced execution control. And you can set restrictions. For example, don't let executables run directly from the Outlook temp folder, because that's probably something malicious going on. Why would you be running executables from a temp folder? Things like that can really reduce the attack surface. And as I mentioned earlier, you can prevent applications from initiating child processes and things like that. So a set of best practice policies can really reduce the attack surface of the system. And then you also have complete hash control to determine, if you want, which hashes are allowed to run on the system. So that's the execution control. Then we have the Wildfire integration that I mentioned before. It's pretty powerful. There's an interesting statistic I put on this slide here. 61% of the malicious files that Wildfire identifies on a daily basis are not detected by the top AV vendors. 61%. So you probably all know this by now. AV just is not keeping up with the new attacks. Right? They're relying on you as the customers. The AV vendors are relying on you to submit the malware to them so they can create a signature. How does that help you? You've already been infected with the malware. You're giving them that sample so they can create signatures and protect others after the fact. So the Wildfire integration, and now in version 3.2 that we're launching today, is it allows uploads of files from the endpoint. So anytime a file, an executable that has never been seen before attempts to run on that endpoint, you can prevent it from running until Wildfire comes back with a verdict. And then finally, the malware prevention modules will prevent malware techniques that we see a lot of malicious software using. So you've got the exploit prevention, and then you have multiple layers of malware prevention that make this a very, very strong approach to protecting the endpoint. So just a couple of words about the architecture and what it looks like. You have a management console. We call it the Endpoint Security Manager. One ESM server now supports up to 50,000 endpoints. So it's a highly scalable solution. The endpoints will find their nearest ESM server. So it's very efficient. And the ESM server can run on any Windows box VM. It uses a SQL Server backend for the event database. And then finally, whenever you're thinking about putting another agent on the endpoint, you really want to make sure that it's not going to impact the end user in a negative way, right? And I was a CISO of a company. I had to deal with endpoint protection challenges, And one of the worst things is when you put something out there for security purposes that slows everything down, and you get angry users, and especially with these endpoint AV products these days that have these massive signature databases. Take 600 megabytes on disk. They take a couple hundred megabytes of RAM when they're doing their full system scan, grinding the system to a halt. We don't do any full system scans. We're super lightweight. The agent installer package is only about 9 megabytes, and the CPU overhead is minimal. Your users won't know it's there. And this works on Windows XP, Windows Server 2003. So if you have environments where you have these legacy OSs that are falling out of support, Windows Server 2003 will be no longer supported in just a couple of months. So we protect those systems for you in cases where they can't be patched. So that's the coverage. And with that, I'd like to introduce Nati Davidi to come up on stage and do a demo for all of you.
Not yet? Or no, it's... Can you hear me? Okay, great. Do you mind switching the slides to the other computer? Thank you. Okay, so just before I start, just so I have a general sense, how many of you participated last year breakout session on endpoint? Okay, so not that many. Good, so I'll just give you a short background on last year session. The focus actually was on explaining or convincing why the existing traditional endpoint security solutions are not that good in blocking exploit or malware, and actually why sandboxes are not good at blocking exploit in particular. And we actually demonstrated a few cool things of how to use time bombs and user interaction-based exploit to bypass the network mechanism and the other endpoint security solution. And that was very cool. But this year, the focus, at least what we want to try to aim, is to explain how different Traps is in terms of the depth of security, in terms of the number or the amount of security layers that we provide, in terms of the number of the opportunities that we have to block attack before the malicious code had a chance to be executed. In order to do that, of course, I will use a demo, and I'll give a short background on the flow itself. So as you've heard, maybe most of you earlier today from Lee, there is a big differences between exploit and malware. Exploit is usually used to deliver the malware. It's a delivery method, which is under the radar method. It's much more powerful than simply send someone an executable file, because most of the security system will pinpoint this file and will try to stop it. So the exploitation phase is a way to utilize software vulnerability to deliver the malware in, and then there is a download and execute phase, and only then the malicious activity is starting. Sometimes the phases can get to 20 phases of attack, mapping the network, finding the more sensitive server, doing privilege escalation, mapping specific ports, etc. But we are focused on the initial phase, which is the most important one. So we have the mechanism that Sebastian just described to deal with exploit, and we have the mechanisms to deal with malwares, and I want to go through all of them in flow of one given attack. In order to do that, I will use a vulnerability, a non-vulnerability actually, because we are not allowed to export 0 days from Israel to the US. So I will use an existing known CVE that actually was utilized in 2014 in 7 different campaigns. These are 3 of them. One is a massive campaign against HSBC. The other included in CryptoLocker. The other one uses the Reza campaign against the bank accounts. But the commonality between all the three, of course, is that the CVE, the Adobe Reader 11.0.2 vulnerability was utilized in order to let the malware, whether the backdoor, whether the Zeus, whether the DiResa, make the way in and start to initiate the malicious activity. So I'm going to show step by step how actually Traps has 11 different ways, sequential ways, to block this attack. And just to emphasize it, even one blockage or one building block of blockage is enough to take down the entire attack. But we have 11 opportunities with this specific flow that I'm going to show. Maybe just since we don't have that much time, I will shorten a bit the demo because Sebastian asked me to keep it flexible. So to start with, I have Windows 7 machine, up to date with Internet Explorer 11, up to date with the superpower McAfee endpoint security solution, and with all the security measures of McAfee running on the background, access control, buffer overflow, on delivery, email scanner, whatever. So I have everything running on the background. And to start with, we have the traps disabled, meaning that I have no policies, I have no engines running on the background. We do not protect anything yet. And before I start, I'll go to the security manager. And just to shorten a bit the demo, I will turn off specific two modules on which I will explain just in a minute. One is the data execution protection, and the other is anti-heap spray. The reason I'm turning these two off is that they're simply very obvious steps of exploitation. We want to go to the more sophisticated stuff. Last year I showed heap spray and I showed execution from data segment in the memory, which is not that interesting. So I will turn off these two modules on Acrobat Reader, but I'm not yet enforcing it on the endpoint. So let's get back to the victim's machine. So the flow of the attack is going to be like that. The victim will receive a PDF file via the email, of course, and this email is an impersonated one, etc. I don't need to even explain that. The file will be opened by Adobe Reader. Adobe Reader will be exploited in 4 different phases. It will create a child process of Adobe Reader in order to hide itself from the antivirus. Okay? It then will inject itself into Internet Explorer in order to, so the Internet Explorer will run the malicious activity on the malware behalf. It will then take control over Internet Explorer. It will create persistency by changing key registry in the registry of the operating system. And it will enforce reboot of the system in order to let driver of rootkit loaded in the next time of execution. So that will be the flow more or less. By the way, it's a common flow of highly targeting exploit with malware, of the most sophisticated piece of malware out there. So I'll simply start. Before I'm showing it, I'm just opening the segment of the registry that we are going to see the change in. It will be between Google and McAfee. Will be added another piece of software that should be loaded when the system is loaded. Okay, so I'm opening the file. I'm just making sure again that Traps is turned off. Okay, we are good. And what happens right now is that 4 phases of exploitation, or 4 exploitation techniques, are carried by the exploit. File is dropped. It will take a minute because it's now spraying the memory. And Internet Explorer is hacked, and it will, in 1 minute, if we will wait, the system will be turned off. So I'll just run a script here to cancel the log off so we can continue showing the demo. And you can see here, if I'll refresh the registry, we have a new nice value here called Ignite 2015, computer was hacked, etc. So there are more or less the steps of the malware. This was a successful exploitation, successful malware execution. And now I'm going to do the same with Traps running on the background. So I'm logging into the Endpoint Security Manager again. I'm enabling all the protections. Okay. Here, if we'll have the time, I'll go through the mechanism that we have. But right now, we have all the default anti-exploitation techniques running, except of the two that I turned off, which is the DEP, data execution prevention, and then heap spray check. Okay, these are the only 2 that I turned off because I don't need them right now. So let's get back to the machine. And let's check in to get the change of the policy. Okay, sorry. So everything now is running. We have the anti-exploitation in place, the anti-malware. We also have a component of forensics. Maybe we'll have the time to talk about it. The policies were downloaded to the endpoint, so it's now protected, so we can start running the exploit. So until we have this running, we'll wait for it just a minute. Okay, so the first prevention is an attempt to access DLLs. We have a module called DLL security. There is a step of exploitation in which the exploit tries to utilize the operating system function in order to initiate the attack, in order to do simple things of copying files from one place to the other, in order to download files. So this is the initial prevention phase. There are more details about the prevented modules here, specifically about the version, the vulnerable version of the software, of course, etc. And if we'll go back to the ESM, we can see that we have a recent prevention just from now of DLL security on Adobe Acrobat Reader. If you can see the small letters, then you can see the actual PDF file that triggered the attack. We also collect all the files that were loaded under this specific process in order to enable further forensic analysis if there is any need for that. But what I'm going to do now is intentionally turn off this specific module. Now, this function of creating an exclusion, which I'm just about to do, is for the purpose of, the very rare cases in which we stop something which is considered to be legit in the point of view of the customer. So if there is indeed an in-house development of an add-on to Internet Explorer that do some ugly hooks and very not nice things in the memory, we'll probably block it. But if you want to allow this specific unlawful action in the memory, you can simply turn off the specific module on the specific process. So the all-in-all security is just the same, and you can exclude this specific DLL security module on the specific Acrobat Reader process, as you can see here. So let's apply this change and get back to the machine and check in to get the new policy. Needless to say that there are heartbeats that can be configurable. Usually we recommend that every 10 minutes the agent will look for policy. So now we have the new policy downloaded to the endpoint. This is the latest policy, and let's run it again. So again, we had an opportunity to block the attack. I turned off the protection intentionally to see if we can block it again, and I just executed the file again. This time we have a suspicious API call from unsafe code area. It's called JIT, just-in-time mechanism, which actually try to utilize some APIs. It becomes more and more common. So this is the second opportunity for us to block the attack. And if we go back and refresh the threat screen, you can see that we have a new report, the same PDF file. This time it's a JIT mitigation. It's a different module. And I'm going again to create an exclusion, this time specifically for JIT, again specifically for Acrobat Reader, just for the purpose of showing that even after taking off one after the other mechanism, we still stop the attack. By the way, in terms of probability, before I continue, the chances that attacker will find a way to bypass each and every of these building blocks are so low in terms of the price of doing so. Earlier today, Mark McLaughlin and Nir and Lee mentioned that what we are trying to do is to create a very, very high threshold. Putting 11 barriers, actually it's more than 11, but putting 11 barriers for the attacker in the flow of the attack make it so hard to get in. And just for the comparison with the other endpoint security mechanisms, you have usually one good or not good mechanism of signatures, of behaviors, of isolation sometime. This is another approach of whitelisting approach. Here we are building such a complicated life for the attacker that the chances that he'll make it through are very, very low. So now after I turned off the JIT, let's check in again. Okay, so we received the latest policy, and let's execute it again. And by the time it becomes too boring, you can just raise your hand and I'll stop it and then explain more about the prevention mechanisms. So now this time we have an execution from restricted actually location. If we go to the details, we will see that there is execution of unsigned executable. So now we are doing our way to the second phase of prevention. I won't waste too much time on the slides, But here we are. We went through, it's not 4 because I took down 2 of the modules, but we went through 2 prevention by anti-exploitation modules. Now what happens is that Adobe tried to create a child process or to download unsigned file, which is the reason why the prevention was the prevention of unsigned executable. Let's go back to the threats. And we can see that we have a new threat here saying that there is an unsigned executable. I'm not sure that you can see it. Unsigned executable trying to run. Now I'm going to the part of management of the execution restriction of the advanced access control. And I'm going to the restriction. I will turn off the specific protection that just blocked it. I will turn off the blockage of unsigned files. By the way, just to give you a sense, it's not just that we block each and every unsigned file. We have some mechanism of checking correlation, like only if the file was written to the hard drive in the last X seconds, and only if it's unsigned or signed by a certificate or issuer, which is not valid, only then we will block it. So I just turned off this mechanism, and we are going back to the station. We check in again, the way that we have the indication. OK, let's go back now. Now exploit it again. So now the exploitation is supposed to be carried successfully because I have no exploitation modules in place to block it. And the file tried to be downloaded to the system and tried to be executed. And this time, I have another restriction of specific location which I choose to block. So the way it works is that when we provide a product, and of course it is highly dependent on the specific environment, there is a set of rules. There's a bunch of rules which we recommend to use as a best practice, again, to reduce the surface of the attack. I think that there is a great place to mention it again, because even with having the best mechanism to block exploit, and even with having the best mechanism to block malwares, you do want to decrease dramatically the surface of the attack because of operation consideration, and simply because there are scenarios in which it will be very, very hard to block things. And there is a very common example that I've been asked about many times. If the organization is being attacked by a malware which is signed by a valid signature, by a valid certification, it's not that common. Usually it happens on a highly targeted, very expensive attacks. But if that's the case, and this specific malware behaves like just any other application, I mean, like GoToMeeting or WebEx, it communicates with other computers, it's trying to send things with the legit protocols or legit ports, it would be extremely, extremely hard to understand if it's a malware because it's considered to be legit on the system. And I think that if someone will claim that he has the ability to block it, it won't be accurate. The way to deal with that is to decrease the surface of the attack. So in this specific case, if the secretary of the CFO, who is the target, opened a zip file which contained an executable file, which seems to be an impersonated document file, and this file is signed with a valid signature, with a valid certificate, the only way not to let it happen is by blocking execution of files from the temporary folder of Outlook, which seems to be a very simple thing to do, and it's indeed a very simple thing to do. So why not doing it? The problem with that is usually it's very easy to bypass this mechanism. In our case, we have a whole complicated mechanism of watchdog on top of watchdog on top of watchdog on the kernel space, not to enable the attacker with any means to be able to take off our protection. So it becomes very valuable. So we have like around 15 items of execution restriction preventions. And by deploying them, you can prevent many attacks even without using the other modules. So with that, I will proceed to the other part. So I will turn off now, the protection of local risky folders. I will deactivate it. I'll go back to the agent. I will check in again. Okay. Let's go back and execute it. I think that we have one more execution restriction, and then we are going to Wildfire. OK, so this time, this is a restricted execution of a child process attempt. So if you remember, I told you that what Adobe is trying to do is creating an embedded DXE, a child process to the Adobe itself, and from this process to execute the entire attack, or try to inject itself to Internet Explorer. So in that case, we block the the execution of this child process, which again, a very common way to block attacks. And I will give you a very simple scenario, which I'm sure all of you saw so far. Sending a PowerPoint file with embedded exe, which asks the end user some question or something funny that make him click something. This click will trigger the executable file and will actually run the malware. But this file will run as a child process under PowerPoint. And there are many softwares like editors, like viewers, like the old Microsoft package that you shouldn't let run child process in any case. Now, there are a few scenarios in which you want to enable such things. I mean, these are not the common scenarios, but like communicated with very, very specific processes for whatever purposes. And needless to say that for this purpose, we have a highly granular mechanism to allow very specific files to run under this, to run as child process under the protected processes. Now, you can choose to protect everything. I mean, all of our mechanisms are agnostic to the environment. You can protect your own softwares, your proprietary softwares. You can protect malwares, okay? Seriously, you can even protect malwares that are downloaded and are already there on your computer. And when they will try to do things, they will be just blocked because we won't let them do that. So just in terms of protecting even proprietary software, you can do that. And if there will be some undesired result of it, it will be a matter of a click to turn off the very small segment that caused this undesired action. So we just blocked it with child process. Let's go back and turn off the child process. This is this one. And again, it's not that we expect that for every environment you will work half a year just to build the right bunch of rules. We will provide you with the default recommended policies. We have policies for designated environment like point of sales, ATM, SCADA, and HMI system. We have policies for IT and development team within the organization. We have policies for the more standard users. So I just turned off the child process, and again, we're doing just the same trick, and I will check in. I will wait for the policy to come. And with that, we are exhausting the advanced execution control part. So we went through the exploit protection. We showed how reducing the surface of the attack can help us not enabling the malware to run. And now we are getting to the intelligence and emulation part, which is practically the integration with Wildfire. So let's get back. OK, we have the latest policy. And let's execute it again. By the way, for the purpose of the demo, I'm not running it against a real Wildfire because I couldn't account on the internet connection. So I have a simulator of Wildfire locally running as a machine. So as you can see, it says now attempted execution of Wildfire detected malware. So this time what actually happens is that in the very exact moment on which the executable file was created in terms of the operating system or was attempted to run, the Traps, the agent, will stop it from running. Even before any small portion of the code is running, we'll take the hash, we'll ask Wildfire whether this is a known file or not. If it's a known file and it's known to be malicious, it will simply block it. If it's known to be benign, it will let it run, and then the other mechanism of Traps will block it in case it is a malware. And if it's an unknown file, it will simply be immediately uploaded to Wildfire, and you will get back the results when you will have the results. It's a matter of configuration. Wildfire can respond within 6 minutes. But if you have your heartbeat set to once in an hour, then it will take an hour to get the results of the inspected file. But just again, to give you the sense, in the process of initial deployment or proof of concept, we already populate all the hashes, most of the hashes across the organization. So it's not that in the day-to-day working, you have thousands of files uploaded to Wildfire and you need to wait for inspection. It's only a few a day, and you want these few files to be inspected by Wildfire a day to get the results. Now, before I continue, I do want to emphasize one thing. Traps is not dependent by any way in Wildfire. We will block exploits, we will block malware without Wildfire. We think that to the benefit of the intelligence gathering and to the benefit of the all-in-all platform blockage and prevention capabilities, it's extremely important to let it upload files, to let Wildfire inspect the files, And of course, to let the organization understand what are the files that we are trying to run. Because one of the things that we noticed almost 2 years ago, before the integration with Palo Alto Networks, is that even in the cases in which we block attacks, we've been asked, okay, you blocked something, now what does it mean? You said you block an exploit. You said that you block a malware. What is this malware? And then since we block it in such an early stage, we don't have the ability to give more information about it. So now we do have this capability, and I will show you how does it look like. And with that, I will stop here for questions because we don't have more time. So we have the latest security event. Let's see it. Here it is, the wildfire prevention. This is the file, the run, and you have here the hash of it, etc. And there are several places in which you can investigate it, but let's have a look here on the hash control. You can see that you've got a verdict of malware. I hope you can see it from Wildfire. And for each and every file across the organization, you can understand how many times it was executed, on which endpoint, on what exact timestamp. And actually, you can download the report from Wildfire in order to learn more about this file. So in the case of this specific file, you can see that you get all the information, all the scores, in the information about interaction with file system. In our case, it was trying to shut down and to run the sample. It was trying to download the winrun.exe from goodwoodcompany.com. It was making the changes here, the change to the registry. Okay, so you have all the details, including the sequential flow and the event timeline of the attack, which is exactly the report that you get from Wildfire on any other prevention. But this time, you get it on the perspective of the endpoint. I think that this part of helping you or us understand what we just blocked is extremely important. First, because it's just enable you to understand what it is. Second, it enables to share this knowledge with the other events that Lee showed earlier today and make it part of the autofocus product and make it part of the intelligence that we have in cloud, correlate things, use this information to find more things, etc. One last thing that I must, okay, do we have a few more minutes? We have 5 minutes. Okay, so I will make one more stage. I will turn off Wildfire. Okay, so I just deactivated Wildfire. And I'm going back to the victim station. And again, checking in. Now it would be actually the first time in the entire flow in which we will let the malware to be executed, but not do any bad things yet. Meaning that all the anti-exploitation phase and all, or mechanism and all the the execution protection or advanced execution control mechanism enable us to block the attack before any malicious code has a chance to be initiated. Meaning that if we block something, the user can keep using the computer without investigating it, without overwriting it with the original image, saving a lot of costs. So this time it will be the first time that we will let the file run, but we will block it with the core anti-malware techniques. So let's run it again for the last time. Okay, so now it says the process injected a thread into another process, okay? Which means that it was trying to inject into Internet Explorer in order to run the malicious code through Internet Explorer, which is an extremely common behavior by malwares. Actually, more than 80% of the malware try to inject themselves into other processes, which makes it almost obvious not to enable it. It's really hard not to enable it, and we were successful in doing so. We have a guided for this specific module. With that, I will stop, or we just exhausted just the 11 ways of blocking the attack. And I think that it demonstrates the extremely, at least from our point of view, exciting capability of blocking attack in such many ways. And maybe just one more thing about what can you do with the information that you get from Wildfire. And this is also part of what we are working more for the next versions, what we already have this here. I've been asked many times, what if I get information from external entity, let's say Homeland Security or whomever, and they tell me, listen, you are about to be attacked with X or Y malware, or you're already there. Maybe you're already hit by this specific malware. What can be done at that case? So if the piece of information that you receive is the hash value, you can simply use the hash-based restriction in order to block it in case it's not there yet, or in order to find it across the organization in order that it's already there. For some reason, maybe if it made its way before you installed Traps or whatever. If you receive the actual malware, the actual file, we recommend that you upload it to Wildfire. Okay? Wildfire will inspect it. You will receive the indicators. And then for some of the indicators, at least in this version, you will be able to look for them across the organization. So things like folder name, file name, hashes are something that can be immediately queried across the organization, which can let you understand if you are already infected by this specific file. In the next stages, of course, we'll be able to collect even more information, more IOCs, more indicators to make this ultimate. So I think that with that, we'll stop for questions, even though we have many more things to tell. So, yes?
Would you replace AV with this?
So the question is whether we will replace AV. The unofficial answer is that technically wise, we block things much better than any other endpoint security solution. So you technically can replace it, and it is highly recommended to replace it with our solution. However, there are regulation and compliance issues that will take some time to work on. Like very recently, I think that 3 months ago, we got the first PCI compliance customer that actually deployed us, and it was received as an appropriate solution. So technically, of course, we are doing much, much better than any other endpoint security solution. Yes, please.
We ran that exploit many times. Is there a mechanism to remove that file from ever being run?
Yeah, so the question is there whether we have a mechanism for remediation, meaning in case that we block something, whether we can remove the file. So the immediate answer is no, because our approach is different. We are not looking for scanning your hard drive, especially in virtual environment, which are highly consuming CPU and I/O resources. We don't want to scan files. We don't want to move files. We don't want to copy too many files. And we believe that with the blockage mechanism, with the prevention mechanism, we'll simply block the attack and we'll give you with enough information to go and delete the files safely because they didn't do any bad thing. However, since we understand it's a very common requirement, we do consider to add it to the product. It's not, I mean, technically it's not that a big deal. It's a matter of a different approach that we thought would be better than simply going looking for files. Yes, please.
You said that it was, you don't scan, but when you were telling to identify that application throughout your system, what kind of scan process is going on there to identify it?
So again, there is no scanning process at all. The only phase of scanning, if you can call it scanning, is by Wildfire, meaning only in the case in which we upload files for Wildfire, then it will let the file run and simulate the entire execution of the file and extract information. When I talked about searching for something, I meant for IOCs, meaning that if you have an external knowledge about existing attack and you want to look it across the organization, then we will enable you to do that for specific portions of information. To start with for specific files or hashes or folders, and later on to do that with also other indicators. It's not the same as searching the entire hard drive, because if you have the full path, you can simply check in less than 5 milliseconds whether it exists or not. It's not like searching the entire computer for a specific hash. Yes, please.
Do you require an internet connection for this to work?
Okay, so the question is whether we require internet connection for make it work. The answer is absolutely not. As I said, the only requirement for internet connection is for Wildfire integration. So you can allow it within the organization, and then when the computer leaves the organization, you will not have Wildfire examination, or you can utilize our recommended infrastructure of having the ESM in the DMZ or in the cloud, and then you can communicate with Wildfire, but it's not a requirement. We have all the other mechanisms to block malwares without Wildfire, so no, you don't need any internet connection, you don't need any signature update, you don't need any behavioral updates, so it's very easy to deploy. Yeah. Do we have, that's all? Sorry.